Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to CHCI's second day of the Leadership Conference, and particularly our second CEO Conversation series, which will focus on the future of energy. My name is Winta Menges, and I'm the Senior Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations at CHCI. I had the honor and privilege to work very closely with ConocoPhillips and Exelon and many of our energy partners seeking to diversify the STEM workforce and develop the next generation of Latino leaders. This CEO and Policymakers Roundtable on the future of energy is going to feature two distinguished members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and two prominent Fortune 500 energy executives. Now, before I introduce the moderator, I would like to thank, on behalf of CHCI, ConocoPhillips, and PEPCO, an Exelon company, for their generous support of this roundtable. Now, unfortunately, like other industries, the energy sector has not been immune from the impact of COVID-19. The ongoing pandemic is already causing far-reaching economic hardships for businesses and communities all over the world. Now, considering the critical role that energy plays in our day-to-day lives, this roundtable has a lot to unpack for us about the state of energy, sustainability, workforce development, and what we should expect in a post-pandemic world. To help us moderate this roundtable, we are very fortunate to have Paula Glover, President and CEO for the American Association of Blacks in Energy, join us today. Mrs. Glover leads a 2,000-member-strong national trade association with 40 chapters nationwide. The trade association represents all sectors of the energy industry, with a particular focus on representing the voice of African Americans and other minorities on energy policy, regulations, and environmental issues. Under Mrs. Glover's leadership, AABE has partnered with the U.S. Department of Energy on its Minorities in Energy initiative, as well as business development programming for minority entrepreneurs. She has also testified before Congress about the impact of policies on underserved communities. Mrs. Glover was appointed to the National Petroleum Council by the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Dr. Ernest Moniz, in 2014, and she continues to serve on the council today. She also serves on the board of the Alliance to Save Energy and Groundswell, which is a community solar development organization. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this roundtable, and please, don't forget to continue the conversation on social media with the hashtag CHCIHHM20. Please welcome our panel moderator, Paula Glover.
Welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Paula Glover. I'm your moderator today, and welcome to the CHCI 2020 Virtual Leadership Conference. Today, our panel, The Future of Energy, a CEO and Policymaker Roundtable, is going to be filled with great information. We're so glad that you're here to join us. I want to also encourage you to chat with us and use our hashtag CHCIHHM20. Let me start by introducing our incredible panelists. First, Representative Ruben Gallego is the CHC First Vice Chair and Chair of CHCI. Congressman Ruben Gallego is the son of Hispanic immigrants, a veteran, and a community leader. He was the first in his family to attend college, graduating from Harvard University with a degree in international relations. He later joined the Marine Corps, serving in Iraq with the well-known combat unit Lima 3/25. Congressman Gallego was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives in 2010 and served until 2014. He represented District 27, which covers most of Phoenix. He rose quickly in the state legislature, serving as assistant minority leader. Congressman Gallego became known for his tough stand against extreme legislation pushed by Republicans in the state legislature. He led the opposition to the discriminatory SB 1062, which Governor Jan Brewer ultimately vetoed. As a state legislator, Congressman Gallego also led the push for Medicaid expansion and to secure in-state tuition for veterans. During his first term, Congressman Gallego fought tirelessly on issues including education, job creation, access to higher education, veterans issues, and immigration reform. Making Arizona a better place to live, work, and raise a family is his top priority. In his first year in Congress, Congressman Gallego introduced the VETS Act, which would reduce the burden of student loan debt on veterans and has supported legislation to increase the hiring of veterans and provide additional benefits to wounded or deceased veterans and their families. Congressman Gallego helped lead the effort to strengthen and restore the Voting Rights Act in order to ensure that all Americans have access to the ballot box. He also authored legislation to encourage gun dealers to be stronger community partners in the struggle against gun violence and to crack down on irresponsible gun dealers. Congressman Gallego serves as an assistant whip for the Democratic caucus, the first vice chair of the Congressional Hispanic caucus, vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and Congressional Progressive Caucus tribal liaison, and vice chair of the Equality Caucus. Congressman Gallego currently serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the Natural Resources Committee, and serves as chair of the Natural Resources Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States. Please welcome Congressman Gallego. Our next speaker, Congressman Henry Cuellar. He is serving his 8th term in the U.S. House of Representatives, proudly representing Texas's 28th congressional district, which includes the cities of Laredo, Mission, Rio Grande City, and San Antonio. Congressman Cuellar currently supports equal opportunity for men and women of all backgrounds. His legislative principles are based on the belief that education, family values, and hard work should open doors to new opportunities for all Americans. Congressman serves as the only Texas Democrat on the powerful U.S. House Appropriations Committee. He is the vice chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, while also serving on the Defense Subcommittee and the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies. Congressman Cuellar was named Chief Deputy Whip for the 116th Congress, where he works in a bipartisan manner to serve the American people. As one of 8 children born to migrant farm workers in Laredo, Texas, Congressman Cuellar was raised with a passion for education and an unwavering work ethic as he sought to attain his educational goals. As the most degreed member of Congress, he credits his education with informing his public service to Texas. After earning his associate's degree from Laredo Community College, summa cum laude, he enrolled in Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Here, while working part-time jobs to accord his graduate degree, the congressman still managed to graduate cum laude, a reflection to his academic commitment. When he returned to Texas, Congressman Cuellar completed a master's degree in international trade at Texas A&M International University and earned both a Juris Doctor and a PhD in government from the University of Texas at Austin. Recently, Dr. Cuellar received a professional certificate in budget and finance from Georgetown University. Welcome, Congressman Cuellar. Our next speaker, Mr. Ryan Lance. Ryan Lance has served as chairman and CEO of ConocoPhillips, the world's largest independent exploration and production company based on production and reserves since 2012. He is also chairman of the executive committee for ConocoPhillips. Ryan is a petroleum engineer with 32 years of oil and natural gas industry experience, senior management and technical positions with ConocoPhillips, predecessor Phillips Petroleum, and various divisions of ARCO. His past ConocoPhillips executive assignments included responsibility for international exploration and production, regional responsibility at various times for Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and North America, and responsibility for technology, major projects, downstream strategy, integration, and specialty functions. Externally, Ryan serves as 2016-2017 chairman of the American Petroleum Institute. He is also an advocate for charities benefiting youth through his service on the board of Spindletop International and a member of the board of directors for the Montana Tech Foundation and the advisory council of the University of Texas Energy Institute. Ryan is a member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Petroleum Engineering from Montana Tech in Butte in 1984. Please welcome Mr. Lance. Our final speaker is Mr. David Velasquez. He is the president and CEO of PEPCO Holdings, the parent company of PEPCO, an electric utility serving Washington, D.C. and suburban Maryland. Delmarva Power, an electric and gas utility serving Delaware, and portions of the Delmarva Peninsula, and Atlantic City Electric, an electric utility serving southern New Jersey. Dave is responsible for steering the company's delivery of reliable and excellent service to more than 2 million customers in the Mid-Atlantic. PEPCO Holdings is a subsidiary of Exelon Corporation, one of the nation's leading energy service companies. Prior to being named president and CEO in 2016, Velasquez served as executive vice president and leader of the power delivery business of PEPCO Holdings. Previous roles with the company include president and CEO of Connective Energy, vice president of strategic planning, and chief risk officer of PEPCO Holdings. Velasquez serves on the boards of several educational and community organizations in the greater Washington, D.C. area. He is a 2020 board chair of the Greater Washington Board of Trade and a member of the boards of the Maryland Business Roundtable for Education, D.C., Policy Center of the Federal City Council, United Way of the National Capital Area, and the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies. Velasquez is also chairman of the District of Columbia's Advisory Council on Utility Supplier and Workforce Diversity, and a member of the Edison Foundation Institute for Electric Innovation Management Committee and the DC Public Library Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library Opening Committee. He continues to serve on the Emeritus Advisory Board of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. Please welcome all of our panelists. Gentlemen, it is good to see you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Let's just get started. I know that we are here to discuss the future of energy, but before we move to the future, let's talk about the state of affairs and where we are today. As a result of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of impact on the energy industry, including a drop in oil and gas demand earlier in the year, voluntary and mandatory moratoriums of shutoffs in the utility sector, and at the same time that demand is falling, we have price wars in oil and gas, oil between Russia and the Saudis. Now that we're 6 months in, at what rate have oil and gas markets returned? Mr. Lance, this question is for you. What percentage of market erosion should we anticipate among our industry players? And in your thoughts, was it pre-COVID? But what is the future of your industry? And I apologize for that, it's a lot.
Well, thank you, Paula. I kind of want to thank all the folks for participating today. Certainly, Representative Gallego, Representative Cuellar, David, thank you for joining me on the panel today. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for the invitation. 6 months COVID-related demand collapse, and I think one way you can start is to recognize the magnitude of what's happening. Across the global economy, we've experienced a 5% drop in GDP. It's the worst drop since World War II. So anyone younger than 75 years of age would have to agree we're in uncharted territory. We've never really seen anything like this. On the oil and gas side, we lost 70 million barrels a day of demand in the second quarter compared to last year. And that's about a 7% drop because the global demand is about 100 million barrels a day. So those prices have collapsed, and producers like ConocoPhillips have lost 50 to 70% of their revenue in really just 1 month's time. So we've had to adjust. Globally, OPEC, other producers like us have had to cut our output. And the demand probably doesn't recover fully till 2022 or even beyond. And some say it may never get back to levels that were pre-COVID. But as to the future of our industry, some of it like it does today and some of it won't. But oil and natural gas are still going to be needed for a very long time, simply because the scale of world energy demand is quite large. So even in some of the IPCC reports on the accelerated transition, oil and natural gas represents 60% of the energy demand by 2050. So this business is not going out the existential threat's not around the corner, and we're going to be needed for a long period of time, but we have to do that very sustainably, and we have to respond to society's demands, but we also have to safely produce it, get it affordably and reliably in all four corners of the world, but we have to do it in a much more sustainable fashion than we have done over the last 20 years, because we don't want to go through this grand experiment with our planet.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists have something they want to add? No? Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about utility, the moratorium and utility shutoffs. And Representative Gallego, I'll start with you, and then we'll move over to Mr. Velasquez. As you know, right, these shutoff moratoriums have been voluntary in many cases, and sometimes mandatory. But the moratoriums are critical to a lot of families who have been really economically devastated by the pandemic. And it's important for those families and individuals who were already economically suffering way before the pandemic. But now that we're kind of seeing the other side of this in terms of moratoriums, the way that electric and natural gas utility rates are structured, they support the function of our utility companies, and a wide application of moratoriums can't continue indefinitely. It's just not sustainable. So how do we meet the needs of consumers during this period who really need help, but also ensure that our utilities can continue to provide reliable electricity and or natural gas? So Representative Gallego,
Well, thank
I'll start
you,
with you.
Paul.
Dave next.
Thank you, Paul. Well, first of all, I do want to thank a lot of the energy companies that instilled moratoriums voluntarily. It saved lives. Certainly in Arizona, one of the things that we discovered is that the people that were already on the margins were basically thrown all the way over because of COVID-19. And in Arizona, this summer was our hottest summer. We had 55 days of 110-degree weather or hotter. So these actions were very timely, and they, were, in my opinion, again, saved potentially hundreds, maybe not thousands of lives in Arizona and God knows across the country. But you're right, the economics of the moratorium just cannot continue. These companies, whether they're nonprofits like we have in Arizona, like SRP, or for-profits like we have in APS, which is the parent company of Pinnacle West, they have to answer to shareholders or just future infrastructure demand they need to continue to investing in using ratepayers. So one of the things that Representative Cuellar and I have been very insistent upon is specifically when it comes to COVID-19 relief is ratepayer or I should say utility support, whether it is directly to our utility companies or directly to the consumers. And in some regards, that's what we're trying to do with our different types of unemployment systems. We're trying to do that also with direct payments to these families in terms of cash stimulus, because we think that actually matters and will help a lot more. And at the same time, we're looking for any other possibilities to really do some fundamental support of both the utility payer as well as the utility. But we recognize that this is not an issue that's going away. We are starting to start our winter heating costs. One of the things that we've been looking into in terms of changing some of the laws is, for example, working with LIHEAP and the LIHEAP program. Prior to COVID-19, LIHEAP regulations basically only allowed a person to use it once, which is ridiculous at this time period where we know that people are going to go through the fits and starts trying to get out of this economic situation. So redoing LIHEAP, allowing it to have looser uses, by the states, I think it's going to be very critical in terms of dealing with dealing with us getting rid of moratoriums.
Thank you. Mr. Velasquez, would you like to talk from your perspective as a CEO of a utility company? How do you manage moratoriums and at the same time the financial viability of the utility so that you can continue to provide an essential service?
Thank you. The number one priority we have is to make sure that we're taking care of our customers, and we recognize the impact it has on our customers. And we've been working and have taken ahead of any directive action to stop disconnecting customers. In fact, have reconnected customers that haven't been disconnected. Have offered a host of different plans to allow customers to stretch out payments, be very generous with those payment plans. In addition to that, as a corporation, we've contributed at PEPCO over $1 million to local organizations that are helping customers as well. But there is a balance. We cannot go forever without collecting money from our customers, but it is something where we're leaning in to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help our customers, both commercial and residential customers, work through this. And as part of that, we're working very closely, as you'd expect, with both government and different regulatory agencies to achieve that.
Thank you. Congressman Cuellar, you're representing the 28th District there in Texas, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share about, just the interaction with utilities and customers in your particular district and how you're kind of managing and helping them manage some of these issues.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, I want to say, Paula, thank you so much for being our moderator and for your experience in this. I certainly want to thank my good friend Ruben Gallego, one of our leaders in the House, and I appreciate the way he provides that leadership at what you did at the state, and of course now here in Congress. Mr. Velasquez, thank you for what you do, and of course my good friend Ryan Lance from ConocoPhillips, thank you so much. Let me first just talk a little bit about what Ruben said. The LEHEAP, which is a low-income home energy assistance program, one of the things that I've done in appropriations, I've added more money into the program so we can help more. But the problem is, and Ruben, this is where you and I need to work on. There's two formulas out there, and we're trying to put money into the new formula because the old formula puts a lot of money to the Northeast. Mr. Velasquez, and what Congress is doing. So we need to change that so we can add more money to a new formula that will treat Texas, Arizona, the Southwest states a little better. So that's something that we've added money, but we need to add more money to the new formula. Second of all, let me follow up on what Ryan was talking about. Look, let me give you some of the numbers pre-COVID for just to give you an example of what the oil and gas industry is in Texas. In Texas, the oil and natural gas industry supported almost 2 million jobs. That is over 700,000 jobs in the natural gas and oil services, wholesale, manufacturing, construction, transportation, warehouses, over 2 million jobs. The natural gas and oil industry, the oil industry, was providing over $180 billion in wages, and that's a lot of money. And when you look at it, who works there? It's going to be minorities. And if you look at the average pay in Texas, the state average was about $52,000. But what the average annual oil and natural gas industry salary, it was $117,000, double the amount of jobs that we have. And I say this because, and I'm glad that CHCI is now looking at industries like trade and oil and gas, because some years ago when I started, 15 years ago, CHCI would only look at healthcare, education, diversity. Very important topics. But some of us have asked, hey, look at the trade industry, because a lot of Hispanics are in the trade industry, but also look at the oil and gas industry, because certainly, especially as we get more of the minorities, Hispanics and blacks into STEM, they're going to be hired by the oil and gas industry. And this is why I'm glad CHCI is now doing energy seminars like we're doing today, and we've done some in trade, because that is something that we certainly have to look at. And as Ryan said, yeah, we're facing very difficult times right now, and we got to see what happens with COVID-19. In my area, Paula, I represent the Eagle Ford, a large portion of the Eagle Ford, and ConocoPhillips and other companies are there. They've done a lot of jobs, but like anything else, COVID-19 has hit a lot of the industries, including the oil and gas. And on top of that, Ryan, there was when the COVID-19 was coming in, there was a conflict. What was it? Russia and Saudi Arabia were having their wars out there, and that affected our energy supply also here, or output here.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask, because we're unfortunately, as with all good conversations, you run out of time quite quickly. So I'm going to ask you all one last question, because it feels like in this industry, we are in what would be described as a perfect storm. So we've talked a little bit about energy markets. We've now talked about COVID-19 and moratoriums on utility shutoffs. And if you needed another reminder that climate change is real, we have wildfires out in the West, and we're now looking at our second big storm hitting Arkansas in the Southeast, as well as Hurricane Isaias that we had a couple of weeks earlier in the summer, and a storm last week. And what we know about kind of the impacts of all of these major storms and these weather events is that communities of color, Latino, Black and Brown communities are hit hardest, many times because we tend to be in areas that are either low-lying, urban areas where you have to suffer the heat effect. And energy plays a role in kind of, I think, the solutions to this problem. Not just, to blame energy, but really we are the solution to how we're going to kind of get our economy and our country through climate. And so I want to ask you all about that, about energy affordability, the impact on local economies. How do we best meet the demands of climate change while also protecting affordability for our consumers, as well as reliability, resiliency, and energy as a national security asset? And so any one of you can start, but that's I'm sure something that's been top of mind for all of you. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
So, right. So one of the things certainly I noticed during this really hot summer is that our communities of color are the ones that are really going to have the worst impact, not just because they are in certain areas like you mentioned, but also they're being climate resilient is going to cost money. So many of my constituents live in houses that aren't the best insulated, don't have the most updated AC system. So as things get hotter, you're going to have to run the AC more in Arizona. But that's also going to create another scenario where you just may not have the money to do it. Or on the opposite end, in many areas where production is occurring, energy production is occurring, the negative outcomes in terms of pollution are disproportionately shared with the same communities. So where the generation is happening, where there's a large amount, it ends up also being large amounts of concentration of people of color. And of course, that's when you also have the other byproducts of it. So there's going to have to be a recognition that a future generation of energy has to have a scope and vision of, environmental justice with it. Because if not, the same people you're trying to help get through these very hot summers are also going to be, which they'll benefit obviously from the cooling or the heating. But at the same time, they'll get the negative outcome of higher rates of asthma or any of these other byproducts. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon the energy companies and policymakers to make sure that there's a good balance to that. But we're going to have to. I mean, we're in climate change right now. And so we have to have a long-term strategy about how to change the direction of climate change. But in the meantime, we have to build resilient communities. And that's going to require, I think, heavy subsidization by local, state, and federal governments in order to make sure that we can really survive or make these communities survive and thrive, at least until we can really change the direction of climate change, which we won't be able to do for decades.
One of the things that I talk about a lot is the fact that if it's not affordable, it's not sustainable, right? So we have twin goals there, and we need to make sure that we're focused on both of them. Very much focused on making our systems more resilient and reliable because of increased storms, et cetera. But in addition to that, as we think about some of the economically disadvantaged communities of color, we are very much focused on putting programs in place to help lower income customers, I'll say, be able to use energy more efficiently. We've been working here in Washington around with some community solar providers, using some of the space on top of our buildings to allow them to install solar panels that they can then use that energy that's generated to push into the local community to displace other energy and provide lower cost energy to customers. We've provided grants to local business, to local housing, low-income housing, install battery storage in there again. So during a major storm event, those customers who are most disadvantaged still have access to the internet, refrigeration for medicine, things like that. And in addition to that, pushing programs like electrification. If you think about air quality in some of our communities, pushing electrification of bus fleets, school buses, things like that, all that can help focus our improvements on broadly, but also especially on communities of color and disadvantaged communities. So there's a lot that's going on. And again, we work in conjunction with the policymakers because we do need the policies to help us move that forward.
Mr. Lance?
Lance, it's either you or me.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, thank you, Congressman Cuellar. I'd probably amplify what Congressman Gallego has talked about. The great energy conundrum is how do you get affordable, reliable energy to all four corners of the world, but do that sustainably? There's a one-to-one correspondence between areas that don't have a good environment. They either have poor air, poor water, they have low life expectancy. They have the same thing in common, and is they don't have access to affordable, reliable energy. And that can take any form. It can be solar, it can be wind, it can be nuclear, it can be oil and gas. So I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we continue the growth and the human development, and we pay attention to the human condition, I think, as Congressman Gallego described. That's so very important. And fundamental to that is getting affordable, reliable energy to all four corners of the world. We in the oil and gas industry have a responsibility to do that more sustainably. So as a company, we've put in, emission reduction target, the first E&P company to put in emission reduction targets. We're a member of the Climate Leadership Council that advocates for a price on carbon. To impact how consumers are going to do that, you have to be able to put ultimately a price on carbon. And we support remaining in the Paris Agreement. We can't go through this grand experiment with the planet, yet we can't let people in our communities not have access to affordable and reliable energy because it's so basic and it's so fundamental to their well-being.
Thank you. Representative Cuellar.
If I can, yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Paula. And let me just follow up on Ryan, what Mr. Lance just mentioned. Look, national security is energy a national security issue? Of course it is. I mean, we can't let Russia be the only one that can play geopolitics. Or we saw what happened in the 70s when OPEC, turned off the faucet for us. We saw what happened at that time. So we have to make sure that we're independent when it comes to national security when we talk about energy. That's why myself and Representative Joe Barton, we passed the ban on oil exports a couple of years ago. That was a game changer to make sure that we have our own national security when it comes to energy. Jobs, already talked about how many jobs, but let me talk about taxes also. If you look at the mineral oil tax rolls for cities, counties, and school districts across the state of Texas, and I'll give you one. The United Independent School District gets about $62 million from the mineral oil and taxes. So that means if you take all of this away, where would that school district get the money to pay teachers and help the students with $62 million? Either they would have to raise their taxes somewhere else, or they would have to cut teachers in the amount of $62 million. So it's not only national security, but it's also jobs and taxes that they provide for our school districts. Finally, the last point, climate change. I believe in climate change, and I agree with Ruben. We got to do something. We all got to do something about that. The question is, how do we do that transition from fossil fuels or other areas to other areas? For example, in Texas, we're number one in the country when it comes to oil and gas. But we're also number one in wind production in the country also. And when you look at methane gas, we all been working together. The oil and gas companies have been working on that. Certainly in Congress, I've added millions of dollars for technology for methane capture to capture all that. So we've been working on this together. The question is, when we get extreme on one side and the other side, and you want to attack and say that energy companies are the enemies, that doesn't work that way. We got to look at climate change. How do we address it? How do we get all the stakeholders together and start looking at that transition?
Thank you so much. We are just about out of time, and I could actually sit here and listen to all of you for a lot longer, but I'm going to invite you each to give us some parting words, and hopefully our audience will have gotten enough of a nugget from you all. You left a lot of them, that we'll continue to have this conversation on a much larger scale because we are all involved in it. Representative Gallego, I'll start with you and the final thoughts.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Paula, for moderating. Thank you, Mr. Velasquez, Lance, and my good friend, Henry Cuellar. I think COVID-19 exposed a lot of frailties that exist in our society, from whether it comes on the healthcare disparities that exist, even racial disparities, but now let's talk about the environmental justice aspect of it. We now know that people are basically living, a big portion of our population are living on a edge when it comes to being able to pay for their utilities and their energy in general, which basically does run everyone's life. So we have to, and Representative Cuellar is correct, we have to find a balance to this. Our energy companies aren't our enemies. They're part of the very vibrant ecosystem that we need in terms of our economy. So there needs to be some compromise when it comes to the future of energy production, again, with a viewpoint towards environmental justice. And, one of the things that I point out is, like, for example, what we're seeing in California right now with the rolling blackouts, that is disproportionately affecting working class poor areas. Because, again, those are the areas that they cannot mitigate. Most of them can't just get into their car and drive to the beach. They can't go to another friend's house that has energy, or they have a better AC system. So these are the things that we have to be very careful that we keep our energy mix sustainable, but both sustainable in the sense of what's it doing to the earth in terms of decarbonization, but also sustainable in the sense that it is consistent, it's predictable, and that it is not expensive. And I think when we're able to kind of do those two things, I think that's when we're hitting the right mark.
Thank you. Representative Cuellar.
Thank you.
Final
And thank you,
thoughts?
Paula, for the work thank you for what you've done, Paula, in bringing diversity in the energy area. We want folks to work not only beginning jobs, but at the top also. So I want to thank you for the work that you've done. My good friend, Ruben, it's always a pleasure. I guess I'll see you on the floor somewhere sometime soon.
Yeah.
We got some votes later on today. And I want to thank you for your leadership in the Hispanic caucus. To both Mr. Velasquez for PEPCO, again, thank you for what you provide, what you do, and thank you so much. And of course, Ryan, the CEO for ConocoPhillips, thank you again for what you do in the state of Texas and across the nation and the world. Let me just say this. When it comes to energy, CHCI, I want to thank you again. I'm glad that you're all doing seminars on energy. I'm glad you're doing seminars on trade, because those are very important sectors for jobs, especially for minorities. And as we push the STEM education, that's going to become even more important. COVID-19 has hit all sectors of the economy. And as Ruben said, that shows us where we got some weaknesses that we need to work on. But certainly energy is important, and it's important for a national security purpose. It's important for jobs and taxes, also for our local entities. And of course, when we talk about climate change, we should look at the energy companies as stakeholders where we can work together and find a balance. And I think that's why this particular seminar is so important, because I think you're hearing both from Mr. Velasquez and Mr. Lance how they want to work with us, how they want to find a balance and working with us together. So to all of y'all, thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Lance?
Yeah, let me extend my thanks. Ruben, Henry, David, thank you. Paula, thank you. Great job pulling all this together, and really appreciate the organization and your interest in energy, which we think is critical. It certainly, in our opinion, represents the greatest challenge the world faces right now. How do you provide this energy to power civilization, at the same time protect our planet for ourselves and for our future generations. We're certainly committed to that goal as well. If I lift one thing, I think Representative Cuellar said a while, the oil and gas industry is going to be needed for a long time. We're needed while these alternative forms of energy grow to maturity and we go through this transition. It's going to require trillions of dollars of investments to do this right and not create the energy poverty that Representative or Congressman Gallego talked about. So that technology, we need to deploy the right people and the right technology and do it in a very diversive and inclusive way that no one gets left behind. And I think Representative Cuellar said it well too. It's really one of the keys to America's prosperity and our energy independence that we're trying to create and being a global power in the world. So it really plays at the juxtaposition of all these key issues, and it's so important that we get this right, both on the policy side in Washington, D.C., and companies like mine, they're trying to support that policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but certainly not least, my good friend, Mr. Velasquez.
Paula, thank you, and thanks for moderating the panel, and also thanks to Congressman Gallego and Congressman Cuellar and Mr. Lance as well. It's been a great discussion, and I think, as we've all highlighted, these are big issues that we face. None of us can solve them alone. But I will say, as I think about my long history in the utility industry, utilities were built to do big things. That's always been our mission, always been what we've been able to do. These are big challenges. And utilities, PEPCO, Exelon, are here to step up to that challenge. One thing I think we didn't have time to talk a lot about is we think about communities of color, we think about disadvantaged communities, is what we all need to be doing, what we're all doing around workforce development, around education. And we have very specific programs in all the areas we serve to drive that. Exelon is also a member of the $1 billion Roundtable, which folks who don't know is a roundtable of companies that have spend on an annual basis over $1 billion with diverse firms, and in fact are approaching the $2 billion mark. So all those commitments are, I think, essential as we think about solving these problems of affordability. Some of that's creating jobs, not just having cheaper, cleaner energy. So it is a solution. It is a problem that is big. And again, as I said, utilities were built to do big things, and we're here to be part of that solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for joining this panel. Like all really good discussions, you run out of time before you ever get to all your questions. I think I sent you each 8 questions, and we got to 2.5 questions. So that's just a demonstration of, one, how important this topic is, but also the breadth of your answers and your responses and the thoughtfulness. So I want to thank each of you for, one, giving us the time and sharing your insights. I want to thank CHCI for hosting this discussion. And on behalf of the American Association of Blacks in Energy, I want to thank all of you for joining us. We have been focused on these issues for more than 43 years, and we will continue to be focused on these. And I just want our esteemed panelists and all of you to know that we are here to support your efforts, and we are here to be a resource. And so I do hope that you will reach out to me and reach out to the organization for any questions you may have. And again, please join me in thanking Representative Gallego, Representative Cuellar, Mr. Lance, and Mr. Velasquez in joining us for CHCI's 20th 2020 Leadership Conference. Thank you all. Have a great day.